Going to give the lake house back to your brother, and then you're going to sign away your half of Dad's life insurance. It's the only fair thing. You always had it easier than Tobias. My mother said this while sliding a stack of papers across my own kitchen table, the same table where I'd fed her grandchildren breakfast for the last 4 years. She didn't even look at the burn scars on my forearms when she said I had it easier. Before I tell you how I turned my mother's own greed into the thing that finally set me free, do me a favor and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. I want to see how far this story reaches. No. That one word landed in my kitchen like a dropped plate. My mother's face didn't fall the way a hurt person's face falls. It hardened. Her mouth pulled flat and her eyes went somewhere cold. I'd seen exactly twice before in my life. Both times right before something in our family broke for good. "What did you just say to me?" I said, "No, Mom. The house was left to both of us. Dad's policy named both of us. I'm not signing anything." She stood up so fast her chair scraped against the tile. And the next thing I knew, her hand had hold of my wrist, the one with the worst scarring, and she was squeezing it like she could press the word back into me. I'm a wildland firefighter. I've spent 6 seasons cutting line on ridges in Oregon and California with a chainsaw into Pulaski, breathing smoke until my lungs felt like jerky. I am not a small or soft person, but there is something about your own mother's hand closing around the part of your body that already failed you once that makes you go very, very still. "You ungrateful little," she started. And that was when my 4-year-old, my daughter, came padding into the kitchen in her dinosaur pajamas asking if she could have juice. My mother let go of my wrist like it was a hot pan. She smiled at my girl, that wide, bright smile she'd never once aimed at me, and said, "Grandma's just talking to Mommy, baby. Go on back." I sent my daughter back to the living room. I poured the juice with a hand that wasn't quite steady, and in the time it took to do those 2 small ordinary things, something in me changed channels. The panic drained out and something flat and clear took its place. I felt it on the fire line, that moment when the wind shifts and you stop being afraid and just start doing math. Distance to the road, speed of the burn, what you can carry and what you have to leave. My mother gathered her papers, told me I'd come to my senses, and let herself out. I stood at the window and watched her back her Lexus out of my driveway, and I started counting what I knew. I knew my father had died 11 months earlier of a heart attack in the garage, 63 years old. A quiet man who fixed lawnmowers for the whole street, and never once raised his voice in 40 years of marriage to a woman who raised hers constantly. I knew he'd left a will. I knew the will split the lake house in northern Minnesota and a $400,000 life insurance policy evenly between me and my older brother. And I knew, because my mother had just told me, that this arrangement had become a problem somebody needed me to fix by giving everything up. What I didn't know yet was why now? Why 11 months later? Why the sudden pressure? That was the thread. And I'd learned a long time ago on the line that when you don't understand the fire, you don't run toward it and you don't run away. You watch which way it wants to go. I should explain about my brother. Tobias is 2 years older than me, and he was the sun our whole house orbited. Straight A's that turned into a business degree that turned into a series of ventures my parents bankrolled and bragged about at church. A craft brewery that closed in 18 months. A real estate flipping thing that ate 60 grand of my parents' retirement. A consulting company that, as far as I could ever tell, consisted of a website and a leased BMW. My mother described every one of these collapses as bad luck or bad partners. When I dropped out of college at 20 to fight fire, she told the neighbors I was finding myself. She told me I was throwing my life away to do a job for people too dumb to use a fire extinguisher. I married a good man, a paramedic named Quinton. And we had our daughter, and we bought a small ranch house we could barely afford. And I kept showing up to family Thanksgivings where my mother spent the whole meal asking Tobias about his big plans and asking me whether the smoke had ruined my skin yet. I did it because he was my dad's family too, and my dad would sit at the head of the table catching my eye when it got bad. giving me this tiny private look that said, "I see you, I know, hang on." That look was the only thing that kept me coming back. When he died, I lost the only person in that family who'd ever once chosen me. So when my mother showed up wanting me to sign everything over to Tobias, my first instinct was the one I'd been trained into my whole childhood. Maybe she's right. Maybe I do have it easier. Maybe keeping the peace is worth more than a house I never go to. I actually picked up the phone to call her and tell her, fine, I'd sign. And then I made myself stop and think like my father's daughter instead of my mother's. My dad was a careful man. He labeled every drawer in his garage. He kept receipts and folders by year. A man like that does not write a will that splits everything evenly between his two kids and then casually let his wife pressure half of it away. If she wanted it changed, why hadn't she just had him change it while he was alive? Why was she coming to me in person with papers already drawn up, 11 months after the funeral, in a sudden hurry? I called the one person who'd know. My father's lawyer. His name was Mr. Whitfield, and he'd done my dad's will and his taxes for 30 years. And when I told him who I was, his voice got careful in a way that made the hair on my neck stand up. He said he couldn't discuss the details over the phone. He said I should come into his office. And then, right before he hung up, he said something I turned over in my head the whole drive there. He said, "I'm glad you called. I've been wondering when one of you would." One of you. Like he'd been waiting. Mr. Whitfield's office smelled like old paper and cold coffee. He was a small man, with reading glasses pushed up into white hair, and he had a folder ready on the desk before I sat down, which told me he'd pulled it the second I called. He asked me how I was holding up. Then he asked me a question that rearranged my whole understanding of the last year. "Has your mother told you about the second policy?" There wasn't a second policy that I knew of. He nodded slowly, like that confirmed something he'd suspected. Then he laid it out, plain, the way you talk to someone you've decided deserves the truth. My father had carried 2 life insurance policies. The $400,000 one I knew about, split between me and my brother. And a second one, smaller, 200,000, that named my mother as the sole beneficiary. The will and the first policy were ironclad and named us directly, which meant they bypassed her entirely. She could not touch our half of the lake house or our half of the 400,000. It was legally ours the moment he died. So why, I asked, is she trying to make me sign it over? Mr. Whitfield took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. And he told me the part that made my stomach drop through the floor. 3 months after my father died, my mother had come to him wanting to take out a loan against the lake house. He'd had to explain to her that she couldn't, because she didn't own it, her children did. She'd been, in his words, extremely upset. A few weeks later, he'd gotten a call from another attorney, a younger man across town with a reputation Mr. Whitfield clearly did not respect, asking pointed questions about whether the will could be contested. And then last month, my brother Tobias had come into Mr. Whitfield's office in person with my mother, asking whether they could be made co-owners of the lake property if I voluntarily relinquished my share. Voluntarily. There was that word my mother loved. "I want to be clear with you," Mr. Whitfield said. "Nothing they've done is illegal yet. People are allowed to ask their family to sign things. But I've been doing this a long time, and I've watched a lot of families fall apart over a lot less than $600,000. The reason I was glad you called is that you're the only one of the heirs who hasn't been in this office trying to get the other's share, and I thought you should know what you're standing in the middle of." I drove home in a silence so complete I forgot to turn the radio on. The math was finishing itself in my head, and I did not like the answer. My mother was not asking me to be fair. She was running a con on her own daughter, 11 months in the making, using my whole childhood of being made to feel like the lesser child as the lever. And Tobias, my golden brother, was in it with her. He didn't need money for a dream this time. He needed money because he was drowning, the way he was always drowning, and she would rather strip me to the bone than let her son go out. Here's the part I'm not proud of. My first feeling wasn't anger, it was relief. Because for 30 years I had wondered if maybe it really was me. Maybe I really was the difficult one, the ungrateful one, the one who couldn't just be loved. And sitting in my car in Mr. Whitfield's parking lot, I finally understood that there had never been anything wrong with me. I had just been useful to them as a target, and now I was useful to them as a wallet, and at no point in my whole life had I been useful to them as a person. That clarity did something cold and steady to me. I decided I was not going to fight my mother. You don't fight a fire by throwing yourself into it. You figure out where it's headed and you get there first. So I called her back that night and I gave her exactly what she wanted to hear. I told her she was right. I told her I'd been selfish and emotional and that I'd had a long think, and I understood now that family came first. I let my voice shake. I let her hear what she'd spent 30 years training me to be, the broken-down good girl who finally gave in. I told her I'd sign the papers. I just wanted to do it properly, with everyone present, so there'd be no hard feelings later. I suggested we meet at Mr. Whitfield's office, since he had all the original documents, and make it official and clean. She practically purred. She said she'd always known I was a good girl underneath all that stubbornness. She said Tobias would be so relieved. She said maybe now we could finally be a real family. I hung up and sat in the dark of my kitchen for a long time. And then I called Mr. Whitfield back, and I told him what I was thinking. And there was a long pause on the line. And then this 70-year-old estate lawyer who'd watched my father be a decent man for 30 years said, very quietly, "Minnesota's a one-party consent state. You can record any conversation you're a part of, and I'd be present as a witness regardless." Another pause. "Your father was a good client and a better man. I'd be glad to have his daughter in my conference room." The meeting was set for a Friday morning. I spent the days before it the way I'd spend the night before a big burn, getting my gear in order. I pulled every document I had. My dad's original will, the copy he'd given me himself 2 years before he died, sitting in my hand and saying, "Just so you know where everything is in case." I'd thought it was morbid at the time. I understood now it was the most loving thing he ever did for me. I want to tell you what I almost let happen, because I think somebody watching needs to hear it. The night before the meeting, I almost called the whole thing off. Not because I was scared of my mother, because I was scared of who I'd be afterward. As long as I just signed and disappeared, I could still tell myself I had a family, even a bad one. The second I walked into that room and stopped pretending, I'd be the daughter who took her mother and brother down, and I'd never be welcome at another Thanksgiving as long as I lived. My husband found me on the back porch at 2 in the morning and sat down next to me and didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, "You keep treating them like a fire, you have to survive. What if they're just people who decided a long time ago that you don't matter? You don't owe survival anything. You're allowed to just be done." And I think that was the moment I stopped being afraid. Friday morning, I walked into Mr. Whitfield's conference room and they were already there. My mother in a camel coat, lipstick on, dressed like she was closing on a vacation home. Tobias next to her in a suit jacket over a wrinkled shirt, with the gray, sweaty, hunted look of a man who owes money to people who don't do payment plans. He didn't meet my eyes. My mother stood up and hugged me, and I let her, and over her shoulder I could see the papers on the table, already filled out, my name already typed in the blanks. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered into my ear. "I knew you'd do right by your brother." We sat. Mr. Master Whitfield offered everyone coffee in a flat voice and got the meeting started. And my mother slid the stack toward me with a pen on top, and I picked up the pen, and I let my hand shake. I let it hover over the line. "Before I sign," I said quietly, "I just want to understand. Tobias, what's the money actually for? Because last I heard the consulting business was going great." My brother looked at my mother. My mother answered for him the way she'd answered for him his whole life. "It's not your concern, honey. Just sign." "It kind of is my concern, though," I said, still soft, still small. You're asking me to give up a house Dad left me and $200,000. I think I'm allowed to ask why. And here's the thing about people who've never faced a consequence in their lives. They cannot stand being questioned by someone they've decided is beneath them. It short-circuits something. My mother's patient mask cracked. Just a hair, and she said the thing I've been waiting for. Because your brother is about to lose everything and I am not going to sit here and watch my son go under while you sit on money you don't even need. You have a husband. You have that little job of yours. Tobias has people he owes that you do not want to know about. That money is the only thing keeping this family from... She stopped herself. But not soon enough. From what, Mom? I said. And Tobias, God help him, broke. The way I'd watched him break as a kid the second things got hard. Except now there were real stakes and a real man falling apart in a borrowed suit. I borrowed against the lake house, he blurted. Before we knew it was in your name too. I used a copy of the deed. There were people willing to lend on it. Private guys, and I told them I owned it outright, and now they want their money and they've got documents with my signature on them. And if I don't pay them back, I'm not just broke, He put his face in his hands. My mother turned on him with a fury that told me everything about which one of her children she'd actually been protecting all along. Shut up! Shut up, you idiot! You knew, I said to her. It wasn't a question. You knew he'd already borrowed against a house he didn't own. That's fraud, Mom. That's not a family favor I'm signing. You needed my name on this so it would look legal after the fact. You were going to make me a party to it. The room was very quiet, and then I reached into my coat and I set my phone on the table, screen up, the recording app running, the timer counting up past 40 minutes. I watched my mother understand. It happened in stages, like watching color drain out of something. First confusion, then the dawning, then, last of all, when her eyes flicked to the cracked open door of Mr. Whitfield's office and she registered that he'd been sitting there in earshot the whole time, the white. She went white the way she'd gone white the day my father's casket was lowered, except this time there was no one left to perform her grief for. You recorded me, she said. Minnesota's a one-party state, I said. I looked it up, and Mr. Whitfield heard all of it too. Funny thing about telling the truth in a room full of witnesses, Mom. You spent my whole life telling everyone what kind of person I was. I never got to tell anyone what kind of person you are. I think today I finally did. Mr. Whitfield stood up in the doorway. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He said that what he'd just heard described mortgage fraud and possibly conspiracy, that he was an officer of the court and that he could not and would not participate in or notarize any document connected to it. He said the lake house and the policy would remain exactly as my father had left them, split evenly, untouched, and that if anyone attempted to alter that, he would be very happy to provide a sworn statement about everything said in that room. Tobias started to cry, actual crying, the kind I hadn't seen since we were children, and for 1 second the little sister in me wanted to go to him. And then I remembered that he'd been willing to forge me into his crime and let me hang for it, and I stayed in my chair. My mother did what she always does. She tried to flip it. She stood up and started telling Mr. Whitfield that I was unstable, that I'd always been jealous of my brother, that I'd faked the whole thing to humiliate the family, that I was a smoke-damaged failure who couldn't stand to see anyone happy. She was still talking when she walked out the door. She was still talking, I imagine, all the way to her car. I'd love to tell you that was the end of it. It wasn't, quite. 3 days later, a sheriff's deputy showed up at my house for a welfare check because someone had called in concerned that I was drinking heavily and unfit to care for my child, my mother's last card. I let the deputy in. He saw my clean house and my kid doing a puzzle on the floor and my husband making dinner, and he apologized for the intrusion. Before he left, I gave him Mr. Whitfield's number and I told him plainly that my mother and brother were in some legal trouble of their own making and that I expected more of these calls. He wrote it down. He said, "We get a lot of these during inheritance disputes. I'm sorry your family's like this." And somehow a stranger saying that out loud in my doorway healed something in me that 30 years had not. The lake house is still half mine. I've never gone. I'm going to sell my share to a young couple from Duluth who fell in love with the dock, and I'm going to put every dollar into a college fund for my daughter, because that money came from a careful, quiet man who labeled his drawers and saw me when no one else did. And it's going to go to the next person in this family who deserves to be seen. I haven't spoken to my mother in 14 months. Tobias is, last I heard, working out a deal to avoid charges and living in her basement. They have each other. I find I don't envy it. The last thing I'll tell you is this. A few weeks ago, my daughter asked me why she doesn't have a grandma like her friends do. I knelt down to her level, the way my dad used to do with me. And I told her the truth in the only way a 4-year-old can hold it. I said some grown-ups love you for who you are, and some grown-ups only love you for what you can give them. And the hardest thing in the whole world is learning the difference. And the bravest thing is walking away once you do. She nodded like that made perfect sense, and then she asked for juice. And I poured it with a hand that did not shake at all. If you've ever had to walk away from your own family to save yourself, type the word free in the comments. I want to know I'm not the only one who made it out. For 30 years, I believed the problem was me. That belief almost cost me my father's house, $200,000, and worse, my own name on a crime I didn't commit. What finally saved me wasn't luck. It was 3 things my dad quietly built into me without either of us ever naming them. The first was a simple refusal to do the wrong thing, even when the wrong thing was dressed up as keeping the peace. When my mother slid those papers across my kitchen table, the easiest path in the world was to sign and disappear. But signing would have made me a party to Tobias's fraud, and some part of me, the part my father raised, would not let my name go on a lie just to be left alone. Choosing not to take the easy, dishonest exit is the thing that kept me clean when everything around me was rotten. If you take one thing from my story, let it be this. The cost of doing right is almost always smaller than it looks in the moment, and the cost of doing wrong always comes due eventually, with interest. The second was learning to stop reacting and start thinking. My whole life, my mother had trained me to respond to her with emotion, with guilt, with the panicked need to fix things. The day I drove to Mr. Whitfield's office instead of just signing was the day I started using my head instead of my fear. I asked why. Why now? Why the hurry? Why 11 months later? That one question unraveled the whole thing. Anybody watching this who feels cornered by family, slow down and ask the question they don't want you to ask. The truth is usually hiding right behind it. The third was the hardest, and it's the one I'm proudest of. It would have been so much easier to stay the quiet good girl forever. Walking into that conference room and refusing to perform my own smallness took a kind of steadiness I had to build the way I built everything else worth having. Slowly against resistance, on a lot of 2 a.m. porches. Quentin was right that night. I didn't owe survival anything, but staying soft and saying no anyway, that took real backbone. Here's the part nobody tells you. Those 3 things feed each other. Knowing what's right means nothing if you're too scared to do it. Courage, with no clear thinking, is just recklessness. And all the clever planning in the world is worthless if you're willing to sell your conscience to use it. My mother had a kind of cunning, but she had no decency to anchor it and no real strength, only the appearance of it. That's why she ended up alone in a house with the son she enabled into the ground. My dad labeled every drawer in his garage. He saw me when no one else did, and without ever lecturing me once, he taught me that a person who is honest, clear-eyed, and unwilling to quit cannot truly be beaten by people who are none of those things. They can hurt you, but they can't have you.